In the early 2010s, horror games relied too much on hide-and-seek mechanics, or the all-out shooter action design. Fans of the genre were disappointed with what it became, and longed for new ideas or unique gameplay. But the future was hopeless. Every developer aspired to make the next big Amnesia. Uniqueness was buried under the ground, and no one had the courage to go against the tide. No one but one person. Shinji Mikami, the creator of the original Resident Evil and director of Resident Evil 4. Mikami was not happy with what the genre had turned into, so he strived to create something new, to give the fans what they wanted, ultimately creating The Evil Within. The Evil Within began development in late 2010 under the codename Project Zwei. The game was developed by Shinji Mikami's studio Tango Gameworks. It was originally intended to be an open-world sci-fi game with horror aspects, before difficulties with concept creation caused Mikami to reconsider and transform it into a survival horror title. Mikami had no interest in making another survival horror game, but when he saw how horror games at that time relied more on action than survival, he felt compelled to respond. He believed that the tropes of horror has gotten predictable over time, so he wanted to make players feel powerless by setting them in confined spaces, limiting ammunition, and presenting near-invincible enemies that promote running and hiding over engaging in combat. Trailers promised a return to survival horror with highly crafted environments, horrifying anxiety, and an intricate story weave to bring players to the height of tension. And in October 2014, The Evil Within was released. When I heard that this game is the next Resident Evil 4, I imagined locations similar to the village of RE4, open spaces with multiple enemies and a great combat system resulting in an incredibly fun experience. And The Evil Within delivers exactly that. Sometimes. The game shines when it embraces its inspiration. The second and third chapters feature open spaces with few enemies and a mini-boss fight. Resources are scattered around the area, and enemies aren't alerted to your existence at first, so you are allowed to sneak in behind and stealth kill them. And these sections absolutely rule, giving the exact feeling of RE4 while adding a dark environment and a stealth system. But the big problem is that the game never relies on that. Instead, it mostly consists of linear levels that are infested with terrible set pieces. These set pieces heavily use insta-death one-shots to ensure that the player has a terrible time of playing. Seriously, how is this supposed to be any fun? The trial and error mechanics never work in a game like this. Forcing the player to die multiple times per set piece is not fun, it's annoying and frustrating. Also, the game features multiple instances of teleportation, where you would teleport from an area to another. And while that does work from a storytelling perspective, it totally takes away the satisfaction of clearing big areas. Every time I clear an area from enemies, I am robbed of the feeling of completion and thrown away in a completely different new world, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. One of the best aspects of a game like Silent Hill, especially the new remake, is the sense of completion after sweeping a big area. The world changed because of my actions as a player. But all in all, the linear level design is really not that bad. Sometimes it works beautifully well when it relies on combat and storytelling instead of set pieces. Speaking of combat, I'm really mixed on it. Aiming zooms in the camera extremely close, blocking half of the vision, like whoever thought of this zoom.
Your life literally is as valuable as a summer ant.
And shooting generally feels clunky, but there is a solid selection of different weapons. The best is easily the crossbow, being multifunctional due to the different types of bolts it uses. But what infuriates me is that the game wants you to fight enemies, but prevents you from doing so by making resources extremely scarce. It throws an endless amount of bullet sponge enemies and expects you to kill them with, what, sticks and stones? When will I take a moment to breathe? Why can't I enjoy the art style and immerse myself with the sound design, instead of dying in ridiculous set pieces and unfair enemy encounters? And for God's sake, who thought of the stamina bar? Like, we start the game with 3 seconds of stamina. 3 seconds. Okay, I think it's time to move on to something positive. The art style of The Evil Within is a beautiful mixture of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. The environments are dark and unsettling, often including huge amounts of blood and gore. Buildings resemble big areas of old Resident Evil games, like the mansion from RE1, and the open spaces resemble the village from RE4, while hallways and small spaces adopt the style of the Silent Hill games. Crimson City often collapses and shifts, adding to the uncanny feeling of the game. The enemy design is actually superb. The haunted are typical zombie-like enemies, but are sometimes wrapped in barbed wire or filled with glass shards, implying that they are victims suffering under a greater evil. The sadist pays homage to the chainsaw guy from RE4. Laura is a creepy spider-like enemy that crawls around and climbs walls. And finally, my favorite, the Keeper. The Keeper is very similar to Pyramid Head, both in design and in meaning, and the first time we meet him is one of the best moments in the game. The blinking filter on the screen, the dark environment, and the incredible sound effects elevate this scene to the maximum. The Evil Within follows Sebastian Castellanos, a detective investigating a crime scene with his partners Joseph Oda and Julie Kidman. After arriving at Beacon Mental Hospital, they find a massacre has taken place. Sebastian checks the security footage of the hospital cameras and witnesses a hooded man brutally murdering multiple police officers in the hallway. The hooded man then looks to the camera and disappears. Sebastian turns to find the hooded man standing behind him, sending him into an unreal world. Sebastian goes through hell and back to crack the mysterious case of Ruvik, our main antagonist. The Evil Within often uses psychological horror to send fear into players, teleporting our protagonist from world to world. It uses its narrative to instill fear in the player. Not knowing what's real and what's not adds doubt to our minds, increasing the dreadness. The story is truly amazing when it focuses on psychologically messing with our heads. Those parts of the game are the most memorable. The save room that is set in the asylum is one of my favorite aspects in the game, and it is one of the aspects that I will never forget. The asylum features different newspapers and notes that pop up during the game, further developing the story and characters. It is also where we upgrade our character and unlock hidden rewards, and the save room theme is just amazing. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The characters of the Evil Within are dull and uninteresting, offering no emotional connection to the player. And the game suffers from pacing issues. Sometimes it would go through multiple sections with little to no story, and when the story beats do happen, they often take forever to flesh out. Hell, sometimes they never even flesh out. Our main protagonist is a bland and empty human, going through hell and back and rarely showing emotions. I mean, I know he has emotions based off of his backstory, which is told through little notebooks, so why in gameplay is he so grumpy and boring? How is his character this different than the Sebastian of the notes? His connection to his partner Joseph is underwhelming. It's like they barely know each other. Joseph could die and Sebastian wouldn't even bat an eye. Well, at least the antagonist is somewhat interesting. Ruvik has an intriguing backstory that literally carries the game's story. We grow a connection to him and sympathize for his past and what he went through. The biggest problem with him is the fact that the game completely disregards his presence at the end. It's like they didn't even acknowledge his existence. His story is underdeveloped to hell and there is no resolution to any of his plot points. Also, the ending of the game is completely lackluster, like it's actually laughable. Nothing is resolved. We went from point A to point B, then back to point A, and having no connection to any of the characters didn't help either. And ultimately, the story leaves a lot to be desired. The Evil Within is a confused game. It tries too hard to mix multiple horror subgenres but ultimately fails to have an identity of its own. It consists of several frustrating design choices and a lackluster story that goes nowhere. I mean, don't get me wrong, the game does have redeeming qualities though. The psychological aspect is very welcomed, the main antagonist is interesting, the art style and environmental design is outstanding, and the general atmosphere is remarkable. The game had endless potential with its ideas, but didn't run away with any of it. Instead, it focused on terrible set pieces and bland story writing, resulting in an immeasurable, frustrating experience with sprinkles of uniqueness. I wanted to love this game. It has its moments and they are good, but much was promised and barely anything was delivered. It could have had its own identity, And I would love nothing more than a new title adopting the ideas of this game and ditching the annoying design choices. The Evil Within came out in a crucial time period and did a pretty well job at reminding people of how the genre needs to return to its roots. Maybe thanks to it we've seen the resurgence of Resident Evil. Who knows? What are your thoughts on the game? I'd love to have a discussion down in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate you leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Also, I'd appreciate any suggestions on my videos or game recommendations. But until the next time, take care.